The instrument panel was dying, one gauge after another, the needles falling to zero like soldiers shot in the back. Marcus Webb had 200 feet of altitude and maybe 10 seconds to live. The P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter, had transformed from a screaming miracle into 8,000 pounds of falling metal. No propeller, no thrust, just silence and gravity. And the houses getting bigger in the windscreen. He was 24 years old. He had killed 40 men in the skies over the Pacific. Not one of them had managed to put a bullet in him, and now a fuel pump was going to finish what the entire Japanese empire couldn't. The irony wasn't lost on him. Marcus glanced down. Children playing in a backyard. A woman hanging laundry on a line. White sheets flapping in the California breeze. For just a moment, his mind flashed to another yard, another set of sheets, 3 years and a lifetime ago. He almost smiled. Then his hand moved to the ejection handle, and the world exploded into fire. But that's not where this story begins. It begins on a foggy afternoon in July of 1942 in Oakland, California, when a woman named Helen Martinez walked into her backyard to collect the laundry. The sheets had been drying since morning, brilliant white against the summer sun, and she had a wicker basket balanced on her hip. She didn't hear the engine at first. The wind was coming off the bay, carrying the smell of salt water and diesel fuel from the shipyards, but she felt the vibration. It started as a hum in the soles of her feet. Then it grew. The windows in her kitchen rattled in their frames. The ground itself seemed to shake. Helen looked up just as the shadow fell across her garden. The aircraft was enormous. Twin engines mounted on twin booms, a central fuselage suspended between them like an egg in a basket. It screamed over her roof so low that she could see rivets in the aluminum skin. The propeller wash hit her like a physical blow. The wind tore every sheet off the line. Her carefully folded pillowcases scattered across the dirt. A fitted sheet wrapped itself around her rosebush. Helen Martinez stood in her ruined garden, white fabric fluttering around her like surrender flags, and watched the P-38 Lightning bank hard over the bay. It didn't climb. It turned toward the Golden Gate Bridge, and it dove. Inside the cockpit, Second Lieutenant Marcus Webb was having the time of his life. 21 years old, a farm kid from Wisconsin who had grown up driving tractors through cornfields and fixing engines with his father. He had joined the Army Air Corps because he wanted to fly, and they had handed him the keys to the most advanced fighter plane in the American arsenal. 7 tons of aluminum and firepower that everyone said was too big, too heavy, too complicated for a rookie. Marcus didn't think it was complicated. He thought it was beautiful. The control yoke responded instantly when he pushed it forward. The P-38 dropped like a stone. Bridge cables rushed up to meet him. Commuters on the roadway gaped in horror as the twin-tailed fighter dove under the span, engines howling, close enough to the water that the propellers kicked up spray. Marcus hauled back hard. The control surfaces bit into the air. The plane clawed upward, over the orange suspension cables, into the open sky beyond. He waved at the tourists on the observation deck. Some of them waved back. Most of them just stared. Another loop would be spectacular, Marcus thought. Then the fuel gauge caught his eye, and common sense prevailed. Probably pushed his luck far enough for one day. He was wrong about that. When the wheels touched down on the tarmac at Hamilton Field, the military police were already waiting. 2 jeeps, 4 MPS with expressions carved from granite. They didn't salute, they didn't speak. They just pointed toward the operations building and fell into step behind him, like prison guards. Major General Hayes was waiting in his office. 60 years old, built like a bull, with a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and angry intentions. A cigar smoldered in the ashtray on his desk. He didn't offer Marcus a chair. He held up a sheet of paper. "Do you know what this is, Lieutenant?" Marcus stood at attention. "No, sir. This is a complaint from the Golden Gate Bridge Authority. They say a P-38 buzzed the bridge at an altitude that violated every safety regulation in the book." Hayes picked up another paper. "This is a complaint from the Oakland Police Department. They say the same aircraft caused a traffic disturbance." He picked up a third sheet. "And this is a letter from Mrs. Helen Martinez of Oakland. She says an Army pilot flew so low over her house that his propeller wash destroyed an entire load of fresh laundry." Hayes stared at Marcus over the papers. Marcus stared back. He had a round, boyish face that made him look younger than 21, the kind of face that belonged behind a grocery counter, not in the cockpit of a fighter plane. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Lieutenant?" Marcus considered his options. He could lie, he could make excuses, or he could tell the truth. "The aircraft handled beautifully, sir. Very responsive at low altitude." The muscles in Hayes's jaw worked. The cigar in the ashtray sent up a thin stream of smoke. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the ceiling fan turning overhead. "You're going to go to Oakland," Hayes said. His voice was very quiet. "You're going to find Mrs. Martinez's house. And you're going to wash every single sheet you blew into the mud. Or, do you understand me, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir." "And when you're done washing her laundry, you're going to come back here and pray to God that I don't ship you to Alaska to fly mail routes for the rest of the war." Marcus did it. He took a bus to Oakland. He found the house. He knocked on the door and apologized to Helen Martinez, who yelled at him in English and Spanish for 20 minutes. Then he knelt in her backyard and scrubbed sheets in a metal washtub while her neighbors watched from their windows and laughed. It took him 3 hours. His knees hurt. His hands were raw. The other pilots were going to destroy him when they found out. But as he worked, running the bar of soap over the cotton fabric, Marcus thought about the way the P-38 had responded to his inputs. The way it had carved through the air, the power in those twin Allison engines, the potential locked inside that ungainly frame. Everyone thought the plane was a disaster. Too heavy, too complex, a maintenance nightmare. Marcus thought they were all wrong. The barracks at Hamilton Field smelled like sweat, cigarette smoke, and institutional disinfectant. 50 bunks crammed into a space meant for 40, with footlockers at the ends and personal effects hung from nails driven into the wooden walls. When Marcus walked in after his laundry detail, the entire room went silent. Then someone started laughing. Bing Bong. The nickname stuck immediately. Bing Bong Webb, the laundry lieutenant, the Golden Gate clown. By evening chow, every pilot on the base had heard the story. By lights out, Marcus couldn't walk 10 feet without someone making a washing motion with their hands. Captain Jake Morrison found him sitting on his bunk after midnight, reading a technical manual by flashlight. Jake was 30 years old, a veteran of the early Pacific campaigns, with deep lines around his eyes and a permanent squint from too many hours staring into bright skies. "You know what they're saying about you, kid?" Marcus didn't look up from the manual. "I can guess. They're saying you're reckless, that you're going to get yourself killed in the first week over New Guinea." Jake sat down on the footlocker across from Marcus's bunk. "They're saying you don't respect the aircraft or the mission or the enemy." "What do you say?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "I say the Golden Gate Bridge is still standing, so maybe you know what you're doing, or maybe you're just lucky." He nodded at the manual in Marcus's hands. "What are you reading?" "P-38, Flight Characteristics and Weapon Systems." "You planning to buzz any more bridges?" "No, sir. I'm planning to figure out how to kill Zeros." Jake's expression shifted. Something in Marcus's tone had caught his attention. "The manual says you don't dogfight Zeros. You boom and zoom, you use your speed and your altitude, and you never, ever try to turn with them. I know what the manual says. Then why are you studying the gun layout? Marcus finally met his eyes. His face was serious, older than his years in the dim light. Because the manual was written for P40S and P39S, not P38S, and I think there might be something everyone's missing. Well, Jake stood up. Listen to me, Webb. You follow the manual, you might survive long enough to go home. You start thinking you're smarter than doctrine, you'll end up in pieces scattered across the jungle. Yes, sir. Get some sleep. We ship out for the Pacific next week. Jake left. Marcus went back to his manual, but he wasn't reading the flight characteristics section anymore. He was studying the weapons diagram for 50 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon, all mounted in the nose of the aircraft directly in front of the pilot's seat. Every other American fighter had its guns spread across the wings. The P-38 was different. Marcus pulled out a notebook and started sketching. Gun positions, firing angles, convergence patterns. He worked until 3 in the morning. When he finally turned off the flashlight and lay back on his bunk, his mind was still racing. He could see it now, the geometry, the physics, the brutal mathematics of aerial combat. Everyone thought he was a clown. Maybe he was, but he had just figured out how to rewrite the rules. New Guinea in December of 1942 was hell on earth. The jungle was alive with insects that bit through clothing, heat that turned metal too hot to touch, and humidity that made every breath feel like drowning. The airfield at Port Moresby was a strip of bulldozed coral surrounded by tents, fuel drums, and the rusting wrecks of aircraft that hadn't made it home. Marcus counted 7 P-39 Iracobras scattered in the bush around the runway, burned-out hulks with their tails pointing at the sky and their cockpits blown open. The mechanics had given up trying to salvage them. They just sat there, as monuments to pilots who had tried to dogfight Zeros and lost. The morale in the squadron was somewhere between grim and non-existent. The veterans drank when they weren't flying and stared at nothing when they were sober. The new guys tried to laugh and make jokes, but it sounded forced, desperate, like whistling past a graveyard. Marcus was assigned to a P-38 that the maintenance crew had nicknamed Lucky 13. It sat in a sandbag revetment at the end of the line, its twin engines quiet, its silver skin already showing patches of red primer where the tropical air was eating through the paint. The crew chief was a sergeant from Pittsburgh named Rusty Kowalski. He had grease under his fingernails and a cigarette behind his ear, and zero patience for rookie pilots. Lucky 13 for the unlucky kid, Rusty said, slapping the fuselage. Seems fitting. Marcus ran his hand along the metal, warm from the sun. Why Lucky 13? Because the last 3 pilots who flew her are dead. A glance at the nose showed no kill markings. Did they get any victories? They got dead, that's what they got. Marcus climbed up onto the wing and peered into the cockpit. Cramped, utilitarian, nothing like the spacious cockpits of the trainers back in the States. But it felt right. He could reach everything. The gun trigger, the throttles, the trim controls. It was intimate, personal, a space built for violence. I'm going to need you to check the gun alignment, Marcus said. Rusty laughed. You planning to shoot somebody? Eventually. Kid, you survive your first week, I'll check whatever you want. Until then, I'm not wasting time on modifications. Marcus let it go. That night, he sat in his tent with the technical manual and his notebook. The other pilots were at the officers' club, such as it was, drinking warm beer and telling lies about women they'd left behind. Marcus stayed in the tent. He had work to do. The problem with wing-mounted guns was convergence. If you mounted guns on both wings, the bullets came out wide apart. To make them hit the same target, you had to angle them inward so the streams crossed at a specific point in space, usually 300 yards. If your target was at 300 yards, you hit with everything. If he was closer, the bullets passed on either side. If he was farther, They spread out and missed. It was geometry. Frustrating, unforgiving geometry. The P-38 didn't have that problem. The guns were all clustered in the nose. When you pulled the trigger, the bullets flew straight out in a tight, parallel column. There was no convergence point, no sweet spot. If you could see it in your gun sight, you could hit it. Marcus drew diagrams. He calculated firing solutions. He worked out the math for closing speeds and bullet travel times, and he realized something that made his hands shake. A Zero pilot expected wing guns. He knew about convergence. He knew he could slip inside the 300-yard point and be safe. That's what made head-on attacks suicidal. The Zero could fly straight at you, wait for you to get nervous, and watch you break away when he got too close. The moment you broke, you exposed your belly and died. But what if the Zero pilot didn't know about nose-mounted guns? What if he flew straight at you, expecting a safe zone, and instead ran into a solid wall of lead starting at 800 yards? It wouldn't be suicide. It would be an execution. Marcus closed the notebook. He stared around the tent. His bunkmates were still out drinking. He was alone with a crazy idea that could either revolutionize fighter tactics or get him killed on his first combat mission. He thought about the Golden Gate Bridge, about Hayes's face when he'd ordered him to wash laundry, about Jake Morrison's warning to follow the manual. Then he thought about the wrecked P-39s outside his tent, pilots who had followed the manual and died anyway. He made his decision. The first combat patrol came on a humid morning with clouds hanging low over the jungle canopy. Marcus flew as number 4 in a flight of P-38s led by Jake Morrison. The mission was simple: patrol the coast near Buna, protect American ground forces, engage any Japanese aircraft encountered. The radio chatter was nervous, jokes about Marcus washing laundry, speculation about how long the new kid would last. Someone made a bet that he'd panic and run for home the first time he saw a Zero. Marcus didn't respond. He checked his instruments. Fuel good, oil pressure good, guns charged. He had 400 rounds for each machine gun and 60 rounds for the cannon. Enough to kill 4 aircraft if he was precise, or enough to miss completely and die empty. They flew north along the coast, staying at 8,000 feet. Below them, the jungle was an unbroken carpet of green. Above them, scattered cumulus clouds drifted like sheep across a blue pasture. Then Jake's voice crackled over the radio. "Bandits, 10 o'clock low, 4 fighters and 3 bombers." Marcus spotted them. 7 dark specks against the lighter green of the jungle. Japanese, Val dive bombers escorted by Zeros, coming up from Rabaul, probably targeting the American positions at Buna. Standard doctrine was clear: climb above them, dive on the bombers, make one pass, escape at high speed, do not engage the fighters, do not turn. Jake's voice: "Flight, we're going high, hit the bombers and break for home." The P-38s began to climb. The Japanese formation grew more distinct with every second. The Zeros were circling the bombers in a protective pattern, waiting, watching. They knew the Americans were coming. They were ready. Marcus made a decision that would either make him a legend or add his name to the list of pilots who'd flown Lucky 13 and died. He rolled his P-38 over and dove, not toward the bombers, straight at the lead Zero. The radio exploded. Jake's voice: "Webb! What are you doing? Get back in formation." Marcus didn't answer. He was committed now. The Zero was growing in his windscreen. The red circles on its wings were clearly visible, the graceful lines of its fuselage. It was a beautiful aircraft, deadly and elegant. The Japanese pilots saw him coming. Marcus could imagine the surprise. Americans didn't do this. Americans didn't point their noses directly at Zeros and charge. The closing speed was insane, 600 miles per hour combined. The distance between them collapsed in heartbeats. 1,000 yards, 800, 600. The Zero pilot held his course, waiting for the American to panic, waiting for the inevitable break. Marcus's hand moved to the gun trigger. Standard convergence distance was 300 yards. The Zero pilot was waiting for that. He would fire at 300 yards and expect Marcus to fire at the same time, and then one of them would break and it would be over. At 800 yards, Marcus opened fire. The nose of the P-38 erupted. All 5 guns fired together. The recoil was like hitting a wall. The aircraft shuddered. Smoke poured back over the canopy. The sound was enormous, a physical vibration that traveled through the airframe and into Marcus's bones. Downrange, the solid stream of bullets reached out like a spear. The Zero pilot never had a chance to fire. He was still waiting for convergence when the wall of lead hit his engine cowling. 50 caliber rounds tore through the lightweight aluminum. The 20mm cannon shells detonated inside the engine block. The effect was catastrophic. The Zero didn't spin down or trail smoke. It simply came apart. The engine exploded. The wings separated from the fuselage. A ball of orange fire bloomed against the green jungle background. Marcus flew straight through the debris field. Pieces of aircraft hammered against his wings. The smell of burning aviation fuel filled the cockpit. He pulled back on the yoke, using his momentum to climb, trading speed for altitude. Behind him, the Zero was gone, just burning wreckage falling into the jungle canopy. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the realization that it had worked. The manual was wrong, the experts were wrong. He had just proven it with math and metal and a wall of lead. The flight back to Port Moresby was silent. The other pilots didn't know what to say. Jake Morrison's voice finally came over the radio, flat and professional. "Webb, report to operations immediately upon landing." Marcus landed Lucky 13 with a feather-light touch. Rusty Kowalski and his crew were waiting at the revetment. They swarmed the aircraft, checking for damage. Rusty walked around the plane 3 times. Then he stared at Marcus, who was still sitting in the cockpit, hands resting on the control yoke. "Not a single goddamn bullet hole," Rusty said. "You went head-on with a Zero, and you don't have a scratch." Marcus climbed down. His legs were unsteady. The adrenaline was crashing now, leaving him hollowed out and exhausted. "I need you to check the gun alignment," he said. Rusty stared at him. "You're serious?" "I'm serious." Jake Morrison was walking across the tarmac toward them. His face was unreadable. Marcus straightened up. He had broken formation, ignored orders, violated doctrine. Hayes was probably going to court-martial him, or ship him home, or both. Jake stopped in front of him. For a long moment, he just studied Marcus. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. "You crazy son of a bitch," Jake said quietly. "You just rewrote the book." That night, Marcus sat in his tent writing a letter to Evelyn Frost, the girl he'd left behind in Wisconsin. They'd grown up on neighboring farms. She was 20 years old, a schoolteacher, with dark hair and a smile that made him forget how to form sentences. The letter was short. "Dear Evelyn, I can't tell you where I am or what I'm doing. The censors won't allow it, but I want you to know that I finally understand what I'm supposed to do. I found something today, a key, a way to turn a bad situation into a winning one. Everyone here thinks the plane I'm flying is too big and too slow. They think the enemy is invincible. They think the smart thing to do is run away. I think they're wrong. I'm not being reckless. I promise. I'm being careful, precise, mathematical. I'm doing what I learned on the farm, finding the tool that everyone else ignores and figuring out how to make it work. I'll be home soon. We'll get married like we planned. But first, I have work to do. Yours, Marcus." He sealed the envelope and set it aside. Outside the tent, the jungle was alive with insect sounds and the distant rumble of artillery from the front lines. Somewhere out there, more Japanese aircraft were preparing for tomorrow's missions. More Zeros with their red circle markings and their fearless pilots. They didn't know it yet, but the rules had changed. Marcus Webb had found the key. and he was about to use it to unlock 40 victories and rewrite the history of aerial combat. But first, he needed to get some sleep. Tomorrow, he was going to do it again. The intelligence reports came in on a warm March morning in 1943. 8 Japanese destroyers, 8 troop transports, nearly 7,000 soldiers heading toward Leh to reinforce the New Guinea garrison. If those troops landed, the war in the Pacific would drag on for another bloody year, maybe 2. The convoy was massive, the biggest target the 5th Air Force had ever seen, and protecting it was a sky full of zeros. General Hayes spread the reconnaissance photographs across the table in the operations tent. Black and white images of ships cutting white wakes through dark water. Grainy shots of aircraft circling overhead like flies around meat. "Gentlemen," Hayes said, his cigar sending up lazy smoke rings, "this is what we've been waiting for. We hit them in the Bismarck Sea. We sink every ship. We kill every zero. Or we lose New Guinea." Jake Morrison studied the photos. His face was grim. "That's a lot of fighter cover, sir." "It is. We'll be outnumbered 3-1. "You will." Jake met his eyes. "Permission to speak freely, sir." "Granted. This is a suicide mission." Hayes pulled the cigar from his mouth. "No, Captain, this is a war-winning mission. There's a difference." His gaze swept around the tent at the assembled pilots before settling on Marcus Webb. "Lieutenant Webb, how many kills do you have now?" "5, sir." "All head-on passes?" "Yes, sir." "Any damage to your aircraft?" "No, sir." Hayes nodded slowly. "The Japanese know about you now. Radio intercepts confirm it. They're calling you the twin-tailed devil. They've issued warnings to their pilots about engaging P-38s head-on." He tapped ash from his cigar. "Which means they're scared. Which means we're going to use that fear to sink their entire convoy." The briefing lasted another hour. Flight paths, bombing altitudes, escape routes. But Marcus barely heard it. His mind was already over the Bismarck Sea, calculating angles and speeds and firing solutions. That night, he wrote a short letter to Evelyn. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." He sealed it and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. The reconnaissance photos kept flashing through his mind. All those ships, all those zeros. The biggest fight of his life was 12 hours away. At 0400 hours, Rusty Kowalski and his crew were already swarming over Lucky 13. They had worked through the night, topping off fuel tanks, loading ammunition, checking every rivet and bolt and hydraulic line. Rusty's hands were black with grease, and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. "She's ready," he said when Marcus walked up. "Guns are perfect. Engines purr like kittens. You bring her back with holes in her, I'm going to be very disappointed." Marcus climbed into the cockpit. The leather seat was still cool from the night air. He ran through his pre-flight checks with mechanical precision, magnetos, fuel pressure, oil temperature, control surfaces. Everything had to be perfect. There would be no second chances over the Bismarck Sea. The engines coughed, caught, roared to life. The twin Allisons settled into a deep, throbbing rhythm. The vibration traveled through the control yoke, through his boots, through his bones. Like sitting between 2 caged thunderstorms, he taxied to the runway. 12 other P-38s fell in behind him. Jake Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "Flight, check in." One by one, the pilots reported ready. Marcus was number 7. Lucky number 7 in Lucky 13. The irony wasn't lost on him. The sky was just beginning to lighten when they took off. The P-38s climbed in formation, heading north over the Owen Stanley Mountains. Below them, the jungle was still dark, a black carpet, broken only by the occasional silver thread of a river catching the first light. They flew for an hour. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the steady drone of engines and the occasional crackle of static on the radio. Then Jake's voice. Convoy at 12 o'clock, 30 miles. On the horizon, where the sky met the sea, tiny grey shapes scattered across the blue water, and above them, black specks swarming like angry hornets. The zeros. Marcus started counting, stopped at 20. There were more, many more. "Jesus!" someone whispered over the radio. Jake's voice cut through. "Steady, stick to the plan. Bombers go low, fighters stay high. We clear the zeros, the bombers sink the ships. Simple." It wasn't simple. Nothing about this was simple. But Marcus appreciated Jake's effort to keep the fear at bay. The distance closed rapidly. The convoy resolved into individual ships, destroyers cutting protective circles around the slower transports, the zeros climbing to meet them, sunlight flashing off their wings, a final check of his guns, 400 rounds per machine gun, 60 cannon shells. He would make every one count. The zeros came up fast. They weren't waiting this time. Aggressive, angry, climbing straight at the American formation with their throttles wide open. Jake's voice. "Break by elements, engage." The formation scattered. 12 P-38s, splitting into 6 pairs, each pair hunting for targets. The sky became chaos. Aircraft wheeling and diving, contrails streaming behind them like white scars across the blue. A formation of 3 zeros diving toward the B-25 bombers below caught Marcus's attention. He rolled inverted and pulled, bleeding altitude, positioning himself between the zeros and their targets. The lead zero pilot saw him. Marcus saw the moment of recognition, the slight hesitation, the aircraft wobbling as the pilot's hands tensed on the controls. They knew. The Japanese pilots knew who he was, what he could do. The zero pilot did something Marcus hadn't expected. He broke off, peeled away hard right, refusing the head-on engagement. A grim smile crossed Marcus's face. So they had learned. They were adapting. Good. That meant they were afraid. And fear made people make mistakes. Rather than chase the first zero, he continued his dive, positioning himself in front of the second aircraft in the formation. This pilot was younger, less experienced. He held his course for 3 full seconds, probably with radioed warnings to avoid head-on passes screaming in his headset. 3 seconds was enough. The nose guns erupted. The stream of lead reached out across 800 yards of empty air and hammered into the Zero's engine. The lightweight fighter disintegrated. Wings folding up, fuselage breaking in half, a bright orange fireball that Marcus flew through without slowing down. His 6th victory. A hard pull brought the P-38 climbing, G-forces crushing him into his seat, grey edges creeping into his vision. The airframe groaned but held together. Rusty's maintenance crew knew their business. At the top of his climb, he leveled off and scanned the sky. Aircraft everywhere. Zeros and P-38s tangled together in a 3-dimensional knife fight. Tracer rounds arcing across the blue. Aircraft smoking. Aircraft falling. Below, the B-25s were making their bombing runs. Bombs falling, hitting the water, skipping like stones across the surface before slamming into the sides of the transport ships. Massive explosions sent columns of water and debris hundreds of feet into the air. But there were still too many zeros. They were swarming the bombers now, determined to stop the attack even if it cost them everything. Another target appeared. A zero climbing vertically, trying to gain altitude for a diving attack. Smart maneuver. The zero was light enough to climb like a homesick angel, but the P-38 had power. Raw, brutal American power. Marcus hauled back on the yoke and stood Lucky 13 on her tail. The twin Allisons screamed in protest. The airspeed dropped dangerously low, but he kept climbing, hanging on the propellers, chasing the zero straight up. The Japanese pilot's head swiveled back. Marcus could imagine his expression. The twin-tailed devil shouldn't be able to do this. It was too heavy. too slow. Except it wasn't. A 2-second burst, short, controlled, professional. The rounds caught the Zero in the wing root. The wing didn't just break, it separated, torn completely off the fuselage. The Zero snapped into a violent spin, tumbling toward the ocean like a broken toy. Victory number 7. He kicked rudder, rolled level, scanned for threats. Fuel getting low. Ammunition down to 60%. Maybe 10 more minutes before he had to brake for home. A glint of sunlight caught his eye. Another Zero, diving from above, coming fast. The pilot had positioned himself well, using the sun to mask his approach. No time to turn, no time to climb. The Zero was already firing, bright flashes from his wing-mounted cannons. Rounds cracked past the canopy. One hit the left boom with a sound like a hammer on an anvil. The only option was speed. Marcus shoved the throttles forward to war emergency power and dove, straight down, committed everything to speed. The P-38 accelerated like a falling anvil. 300 miles per hour. 350, 400. The controls stiffened up as the airframe approached compressibility. The whole aircraft began to shake. This was the danger zone. Push too hard and the dive became unrecoverable. The plane would lock up and drive straight into the ocean. But Marcus had practiced this. He knew exactly how far he could push. The buffet in the tail, the vibration in the stick. He rode the edge like a surfer on a razor blade. The Zero tried to follow, but Zeros weren't built for high-speed dives. The lightweight airframe couldn't handle the stress. The Japanese pilot pulled out early, breaking off the attack. Marcus kept diving until he was 100 feet above the water. Then he pulled with everything he had. His vision tunneled as blood drained from his head. The G-suit squeezed his legs, fighting to keep blood in his brain. He groaned, fighting the blackout, trusting his instruments, trusting the airframe. Lucky 13 leveled off with her belly almost touching the wave tops. Marcus gasped for air, waiting for his vision to clear. When it did, he was alone. The furball had moved on. Behind him, the ocean was burning. 3 transport ships were on fire. 1 destroyer was listing badly. The B-25s had done their job. And the Zeros were scattering, breaking off, running for home. He turned Lucky 13 toward Port Moresby. His hands were shaking again. During the fight, he'd been so focused that the adrenaline hadn't registered. Now it crashed through his system like a flood. A glance at the fuel gauge, enough to make it home. Barely. The damage indicator showed the round that had hit his left boom had punched through the aluminum skin but missed anything vital. Lucky 13 was living up to her name. The flight back took 45 minutes. Marcus used the time to calm his breathing, to process what had just happened. He had entered the biggest air battle of the Pacific War. He had engaged multiple enemies. He had fired his guns with precision and discipline. And he was going home. 2 more confirmed victories, maybe a third if someone had seen the climbing Zero come apart. When Port Moresby appeared on the horizon, he allowed himself a small smile. He had survived. And he had proven something important. The head-on tactic wasn't a fluke. It was a system. A repeatable, teachable method of killing Zeros. Other pilots could learn it. The entire 5th Air Force could adopt it. The war was about to change. 2 weeks after the Bismarck Sea, his 8th victory came during a routine patrol. A Zero that made the fatal mistake of flying straight at him. Marcus opened fire at 1,000 yards. The Zero exploded so violently that debris punched holes in Lucky 13's wings. The 9th followed 3 days later, a bomber escort mission where a Zero tried to bounce him from above. Marcus reversed hard, got nose on, and fired. The Zero came apart before it could complete its attack run. By the time his 10th victory was confirmed, the other pilots had stopped making laundry jokes. They watched him in the briefing tent. asked questions about sight pictures, about trigger control, about how to judge distance when closing at 600 miles per hour. Marcus answered their questions, showed them his notebook with the diagrams and calculations. He wasn't keeping secrets. If sharing his methods saved American lives, he would teach anyone who asked. The 11th and 12th victories came during a single mission over Wewak, 2 Zeros that tried to sandwich him, one high and one low. Marcus fired at the high one first, destroyed it, then used his speed to escape the low one and come around for a second pass, both kills in under 3 minutes. By his 15th victory, Marcus had developed a reputation. Japanese radio traffic, intercepted and translated, referenced the Twin Devil and warned pilots to avoid head-on engagements at all costs. The psychological impact was enormous. The Zero had relied on fear, on intimidation, on the enemy making mistakes out of panic. But you couldn't panic a P-38 pilot who knew he had a superior firing solution. General Hayes pinned a Distinguished Flying Cross on his chest after the 20th victory. The ceremony was brief. Hayes shook his hand and said, "You're making me look smart for not court-martialing you, Lieutenant." Marcus smiled. "Just doing my job, sir." "Your job is staying alive. Don't forget that." But staying alive meant killing the enemy, and Marcus was very good at killing the enemy. The newspapers back home started running stories. Farm boy from Wisconsin becomes ace. Corn-fed kid shoots down Japanese elite. The headlines were ridiculous, but the numbers didn't lie. Marcus Webb was destroying the myth of zero invincibility one head-on pass at a time. His 22nd victory came on a clear morning over Leh. A veteran Japanese pilot who tried to outthink the head-on tactic by snap-rolling at the last second, but Marcus had seen that move before. He led his target, anticipated the roll, and stitched 20mm shells through the Zero's cockpit. Victories 23 and 24 happened during the same mission. A flight of Zeros trying to protect a reconnaissance aircraft. Marcus destroyed the lead Zero head-on, then used energy tactics to climb above the second one and attack from a high angle. Both confirmed kills. The 25th victory was different. Personal. A Zero had shot down one of the new pilots Marcus had been training. The kid had frozen in the moment of engagement, forgot everything he'd been taught, and paid for it with his life. Marcus hunted that Zero across 30 miles of ocean, finally catching him trying to return to base. The head-on pass was textbook. The Zero exploded. Marcus didn't feel satisfaction, just cold professional completion. 26 kills, Edward Stone's World War I record, set 25 years earlier. Unreachable, untouchable, the gold standard of American aerial combat. Marcus broke it on his next mission. The 27th victory was a Zero trying to intercept a supply convoy. Marcus came out of the sun, the Zero never saw him coming, and the fight was over in 5 seconds. The media circus that followed was intense. Reporters wanted interviews. The War Department wanted him to sell bonds. Hollywood wanted to make a movie. Marcus refused all of it. He just wanted to fly. But General Hayes had other ideas. The order came down 3 days after the 27th kill. Marcus was summoned to Hayes's office. The general was behind his desk, cigar in his teeth, a thick folder open in front of him. "Sit down, Lieutenant." Marcus sat. He had a bad feeling about this. Hayes pulled the cigar from his mouth. "You're being sent home." The words hit like a punch. "Sir, That's not a request. That's an order. You've broken the record. You've proven your tactic works. Hell, we're teaching it at flight school now, but you're too valuable to risk anymore. You get shot down, American morale takes a hit we can't afford." "Sir, with respect, the war isn't over. I know there are still Japanese aircraft out there, and we have plenty of pilots who can shoot them down using the methods you developed. You've done your part. Now go home. Marry that girl you keep writing to. Live your life." Marcus stood. His jaw was tight. Is that final, sir? Hayes studied him for a long moment, then he sighed. No, it's not final. Sit back down. Marcus sat. I'm assigning you to instructor duty. You'll train new pilots, teach them the head-on tactic, but you will not, under any circumstances, engage in combat operations. Are we clear? It was a compromise. Marcus recognized it for what it was. Hayes was trying to keep him alive while still keeping him useful. Yes, sir. Good. Dismissed. Marcus saluted and left. Outside the operations building, he stood in the tropical heat and studied the sky. Somewhere up there, Japanese pilots were flying missions, and he wasn't allowed to stop them. He smiled. Hayes had said no combat operations. He hadn't said anything about self-defense. The first training flight happened 3 days later. Marcus took 2 rookie pilots up for what he called familiarization with combat altitudes. They flew north, staying at 12,000 feet when they encountered a flight of Japanese bombers escorted by 4 Zeros. This is an excellent learning opportunity, Marcus said calmly over the radio. Watch what I do. He charged the lead Zero head-on, fired at 800 yards. The Zero exploded. Marcus pulled up and around, positioned himself behind another Zero, and fired again. Another victory. The 2 rookie pilots watched in stunned silence as Marcus systematically destroyed 2 more Zeros in under 90 seconds. Then they escorted the damaged bombers back to base. His 28th and 29th victories. Self-defense, of course. Hayes read the combat report with his jaw clenched. His aide stood nervously nearby. He's playing me, Hayes said. Should we ground him, sir? Hayes was quiet for a long time. Then he shook his head. No, he's killing more Zeros than entire squadrons. If he wants to call it training, fine. Let him call it whatever he wants. The victories continued. 30 became 31 during an instructional flight on navigation techniques. 32 and 33 came when a training mission accidentally intercepted a bomber group. By the time he reached 35, the Japanese had stopped sending bombers anywhere near New Guinea without massive fighter escorts, and even then they took losses. Each training mission followed the same pattern. Marcus would take up students, encounter enemy aircraft, demonstrate proper engagement techniques, and return with additional kill markings on Lucky 13's nose. The fiction was maintained, the victories accumulated: 36, 37, 38, 39. The final kill, number 40, came in late 1944 over the Philippines. Marcus was flying with 2 students when they encountered a lone Zero. But this wasn't an ordinary Zero, this was a veteran, an ace. The aircraft was painted with special markings and it moved with absolute confidence. The Japanese pilot saw Marcus coming and did something unexpected. He refused the head-on engagement. Instead, he turned hard, forcing a turning fight. Marcus accepted the challenge. For the first time in 2 years, he entered a dogfight. The 2 aircraft circled each other, each pilot seeking an opening. The Zero was lighter, more agile, but Marcus had power and altitude. They climbed together, vertical spirals, trading energy for position. The Zero pilot was good, better than good. He anticipated Marcus's moves, countered them, pushed back. For 3 full minutes they fought, neither gaining advantage, 2 professionals at the top of their game. Then Marcus saw his opening. The Zero pilot had committed to a high yo-yo maneuver, bleeding speed to gain position, but he had misjudged Marcus's energy state. Marcus had more speed than the Japanese pilot thought. He rolled, pulled nose down, and accelerated. Coming around the circle fast, building speed, he merged head-on with the climbing Zero from below. The Japanese pilot realized his mistake, tried to roll away, but it was too late. Marcus fired. A 3-second burst. The wall of lead caught the Zero in the belly, tore through the cockpit, and shredded the wing spar. The aircraft came apart in mid-air. Victory number 40. Marcus didn't celebrate. He just watched the burning wreckage fall and thought about the pilot inside. Someone skilled, someone brave, someone who had families and dreams and a life before this war. 40 men who wouldn't go home. He turned Lucky 13 toward base and flew in silence. That night, General Hayes called him into the office one final time. "It's over, Marcus." First time Hayes had used his first name. "You've done enough. More than enough. You're going home. That's final. No compromises this time." Marcus studied the map on Hayes's wall. All the pins marking Japanese positions. All the battles still to be fought. "Yes, sir. You've changed how we fight this war. You've saved hundreds of American lives, maybe thousands. Be proud of that." Marcus stood, saluted. "Thank you, sir." He walked back to his tent and packed his belongings. It didn't take long. He didn't have much. A few letters from Evelyn, his notebook with the diagrams. A photograph of Lucky 13 with 40 small rising suns painted below the cockpit. The next morning, Jake Morrison drove him to the airfield, where a transport plane waited. "You did good, kid," Jake said. "Hell, you did better than good. You rewrote the manual." Someone had to. They shook hands. Marcus climbed aboard the transport. As it taxied for takeoff, he peered out the window at Lucky 13, sitting in her revetment. Rusty Kowalski was already preparing her for the next pilot. The plane took off. New Guinea fell away below. Marcus watched until it disappeared, then closed his eyes. He had survived. 40 victories, 0 defeats. Now he had to figure out how to live with what he had done. California in early 1945 smelled like orange blossoms and gasoline. Nothing like the jungle rot of New Guinea. Nothing like the cordite smell that still lived in Marcus Webb's nose, even 3 weeks after leaving the Pacific. Standing on the tarmac at March Field, watching ground crew unload his duffel bag from the transport plane, he wondered if he would ever feel clean again. Evelyn Frost was waiting at the gate. She wore a blue dress, and her hair was different, longer than he remembered, and when she saw him, she started running. Marcus dropped his bag and caught her. She felt impossibly small in his arms. Fragile, like something that could break if he held too tight. "You're home," she said into his shoulder. "You're really home." "I'm home." But he wasn't, not really. His body was in California, but his mind was still over the Bismarck Sea, calculating firing solutions and closure rates. He could still feel Lucky 13's control, yoke in his hands. Still see the zeros coming apart in his gun sight. Evelyn pulled back and studied his face. Really looked at him. Her smile faltered. "Marcus?" "I'm fine," he said. "Just tired." It was the first lie. There would be others. The drive to her parents' house took an hour. Evelyn talked the whole way, filling the silence with news from home. Who had gotten married? Who had enlisted? Which farms were struggling with the labor shortage? Marcus nodded in the right places and made appropriate sounds, but he wasn't really listening. He was watching the sky through the windshield, tracking imaginary aircraft, his brain refusing to shut down the combat calculations that had kept him alive for 2 years. Evelyn's father had arranged a dinner party. Welcome home the hero. Half the town showed up. They wanted to shake his hand, hear stories, see the medals. Marcus sat at the head of the table in his dress uniform and felt like a fraud. An older man, a veteran of the First World War, raised a glass. "Tell us about the war, Lieutenant. What was it like shooting down all those Japanese?" The table went quiet. Everyone leaning forward, eager for glory stories. Marcus set down his fork. "I'd rather not." The man blinked. "But surely—" "I said I'd rather not." His voice was flat, final. The conversation died. Evelyn's hand found his under the table, squeezed gently. Warning or comfort, he couldn't tell which. Later, after everyone had left, Evelyn found him standing in the backyard staring at nothing. The night was cool and clear, stars everywhere, no artillery flashes on the horizon, no aircraft engines droning overhead. "You're not okay," she said quietly. "I'm fine." "Don't lie to me, Marcus. We've known each other since we were children. I can see it in your eyes. You're somewhere else." He wanted to tell her, wanted to explain that every time he closed his eyes he saw burning zeros, heard the sound of aluminum tearing, felt the vibration of guns firing, that he had killed 40 men and couldn't remember most of their faces, but he remembered every single impact, every explosion, every piece of debris that had hit his wings. Instead, he said, "I need time, that's all, just time." She moved closer, put her arms around him from behind, rested her head against his back. "Take all the time you need," she whispered. "I'll be here." That night, Marcus woke up screaming. The dream was always the same, a zero coming straight at him, but his guns won't fire. The trigger's dead. The Japanese pilot's face visible through the canopy, smiling, knowing Marcus is about to die. Impact, fire, falling. Evelyn held him until the shaking stopped. She didn't ask questions, she just held him. In the morning, Marcus found her in the kitchen making coffee. Her eyes were red. She hadn't slept. "How often?" she asked. "Every night?" "Since you got back?" "Since the Bismarck Sea." She set down the coffee pot. Her hands were shaking. "Marcus, you need help." "I need to fly." "No, you need it. I need to fly, Evelyn. It's the only thing that makes sense anymore. Up there, everything is clean. Simple. Physics and geometry. Down here, everything is... He gestured vaguely at the world. Complicated. They planned the wedding anyway, set a date for September, sent out invitations. Evelyn's mother took measurements for her dress. Marcus went through the motions, nodding and agreeing to decisions about flowers and music and seating arrangements that all seemed equally meaningless. He tried to care. He wanted to care. Evelyn deserved someone who cared. But all he could think about was the sky. The letter arrived in June. Official Army Air Forces stationery. Colonel Stevens' Test Flight Division requesting Lieutenant Webb's presence at the Lockheed facility in Burbank for a matter of national importance. Marcus read it 3 times, then he showed it to Evelyn. She read it once and set it down. "You're going to go?" "It's just a meeting." "You're going to go," she repeated. Not a question, a statement of fact. Marcus drove to Burbank alone. The Lockheed facility was massive, sprawling across acres of California desert. Security was tight. Guards checked his identification twice before letting him through the gate. Colonel Stevens was waiting in a hangar that smelled like machine oil and fresh paint. 50 years old, grey at the temples, with the weathered appearance of a man who had spent his life around aircraft. "Lieutenant Webb, thank you for coming." They shook hands. "Walk with me." They walked deeper into the hangar, past rows of P-38s in various stages of assembly, past experimental modifications and prototype systems. Then Stevens stopped in front of a tarp-covered shape at the far end of the building. "The war is ending," Stevens said. "Germany surrendered last month. Japan is on the ropes. But the next war is already starting. The jet age. Whoever masters jet propulsion first will own the skies for the next 50 years. He pulled the tarp away. The P-80 Shooting Star sat there like a sculpture, sleek, streamlined, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with function and everything to do with speed. No propellers, no bulky radial engine, just smooth lines and a single intake in the nose feeding a turbine that promised power beyond anything Marcus had ever flown. "Jesus," Marcus whispered, "we need the best pilot alive to test her, to prove to the brass that jets are the future." To work out the bugs before we start mass production. Stevens met his eyes. We need you. Marcus walked around the aircraft, ran his hand along the fuselage. The surface was smooth, flawless. I'm retired. We'll unre-fire you. I promised my fiancée I was done flying. This isn't combat. It's test flying, routine evaluation flights. You take her up, put her through her paces, write reports on handling characteristics. Safe as driving a car. Marcus laughed. It was a bitter sound. Nothing about flying is safe. Safer than New Guinea. That was true. No one was shooting at test pilots. No Zeros diving out of the sun. Just flight testing. Pure flying. The thing he had loved before the war turned it into killing. I need to think about it. Stevens nodded. Take your time, but not too much time. We start flight trials in 4 weeks. Marcus drove home in silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in reds and oranges that reminded him of burning aircraft. He gripped the steering wheel and tried to imagine saying no. Tried to imagine a life of wedding planning and normal jobs and never touching a control yoke again. He couldn't do it. Evelyn was waiting on the porch when he pulled up. She took one look at his face and knew. They want you to test new aircraft. Yes. And you want to do it. Marcus climbed the steps slowly, sat down next to her. I don't know how to not fly, Evelyn. I've tried. For 3 weeks I've tried to be normal. To care about tablecloths and guest lists and what kind of cake we're serving, but all I think about is the sky. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was very small. Is it because of the war? The things you saw? No. Maybe, I don't know. I think I've always been like this. Even back on the farm. Remember when I crashed my father's truck, trying to see how fast it could go? When I climbed the water tower, just to see what the view was like? You were reckless then, too. I was curious. I wanted to know the limits. I still do. He took her hand. This isn't combat. No one's shooting at me. It's just testing. They need data on jet engine performance and I'm qualified to provide it. That's all. Evelyn stared at their joined hands. You promise it's safe? Marcus thought about lying. Thought about telling her what she wanted to hear. But he respected her too much for that. I promise I'll be careful. She pulled her hand away, stood up, walked to the edge of the porch, and gazed out at the darkening fields. I almost said no, she said quietly. I almost told you that if you get in another plane, we're done. That I can't spend my life wondering if you're coming home. She turned to face him. But that wouldn't be fair. You'd resent me. You'd wonder what you'd missed. And eventually you'd hate me for keeping you on the ground. Evelyn bit. So go. Test their jet plane. Do what you need to do. But Marcus, her eyes were fierce. This is the last time. After this, you're done. We get married. We start our life. No more flying. No more pushing limits. Just us. Can you promise me that? Marcus stood, crossed to her, took both her hands in his. I promise. One last flight program. Then I'm done forever. She searched his face, looking for doubt, looking for lies. Whatever she saw there, it was enough. She kissed him. Okay. One last time. August 6th, 1945, started like any other summer morning in Burbank. Clear skies, temperature already climbing toward 80 degrees. Marcus woke before dawn. Evelyn was still sleeping, her dark hair spread across the pillow. He watched her for a moment, memorizing her face. This was the final evaluation flight. The last test. After today, the P-80 program would move forward without him. He would file his final report, turn in his flight gear, and go home to plan a wedding. He kissed her forehead gently. She stirred but didn't wake. I love you, he whispered. I'll be home for dinner. The drive to Burbank took 40 minutes. The Lockheed facility was already awake, mechanics and engineers moving between hangars, preparing for the day's tests. Marcus checked in at security and walked to the flight line. The P-80 sat in the morning sun like a promise. Rusty Kowalski was there, transferred from the Pacific to work on the jet program. He glanced up from the engine inspection panel when Marcus approached. "Morning, Lieutenant. She's ready when you are." Marcus did his walk around, checked the control surfaces, the landing gear, the intake. Everything appeared perfect. Lockheed built good aircraft. "How's the fuel pump?" Marcus asked. Rusty hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but Marcus caught it. "What?" "Primary pump's been temperamental, acting up during ground tests, but we replaced it yesterday. Tested it 3 times last night. It's solid now." "You sure?" "I'm sure. Wouldn't let you fly if I wasn't." Marcus nodded. He trusted Rusty. The man had kept Lucky 13 flying through 2 years of combat. If he said the fuel pump was good, it was good. Climbing the ladder to the cockpit, Marcus settled into the seat and began his pre-flight checklist. Magnetos, battery, hydraulics, everything checked out. The jet engine start sequence was different from piston engines. No coughing, no sputtering, just a high-pitched whine that built and built until it became a scream. The aircraft vibrated differently too, smoother, no reciprocating pistons hammering away, just the pure rotational force of the turbine. Marcus released the brakes and taxied to the runway. The tower cleared him for takeoff. He ran the engine up to full power, feeling the thrust pushing the aircraft forward even with the brakes locked. When he released them, the P-80 leaped forward. Acceleration was incredible, faster than any propeller-driven aircraft. The runway markers blurred past. Marcus pulled back gently on the stick, and the shooting star lifted into the air like it was eager to fly. For 90 seconds, everything was perfect. Climbing to 1,000 feet, he leveled off. The aircraft responded beautifully. Light controls, excellent visibility. This was the future. This was what aviation would become. Fast, clean, efficient. He smiled. For the first time in months, a genuine smile. This was flying, pure flying, no combat, no killing, just a man and a machine dancing through the morning sky. Then the fuel pressure warning light flickered on. A glance at the gauge. Dropping. Fast. He checked the backup pump, already at full capacity, trying to compensate. Not enough. The engine coughed once, twice, then died completely. The sudden silence was profound. No engine noise, no wind noise, just the whisper of air over the canopy and the sound of Marcus's own breathing. 400 feet. Descending. The aircraft was a glider now, but a heavy one, not designed for unpowered flight. Every second he lost altitude. 300 feet. The tower was calling him. "Shooting Star 1, we show your engine off. Can you restart?" He tried, hit the ignition. The turbine turned but wouldn't catch. Fuel pressure still 0. The pump had failed completely. 200 feet. Below him, houses, a residential neighborhood, streets, yards. He could see a woman hanging laundry, children playing in a sprinkler, 150 feet. Marcus's hand moved to the ejection handle. He could pull it now, blow the canopy. The rocket seat would throw him clear. The parachute would deploy. He would survive, but the P-80 would continue flying. A pilotless missile aimed at those houses, at those children. 100 feet. The mathematics were simple, brutal, clear. He could save himself or he could save them, not both. The altitude was too low. If he guided the aircraft away from the houses, he wouldn't have enough altitude left to eject safely. 75 feet. Images flashed through his mind. Evelyn, sleeping this morning, the promise he had made to her, the wedding in September that he would never attend, his parents back in Wisconsin who would bury their only son, 40 men he had killed in combat. Good men, probably, men with families and futures, the children playing in the sprinkler below, 50 feet. Marcus's hands moved on the controls, not reaching for the ejection handle, guiding the aircraft, banking right, away from the houses. There was an empty field ahead, industrial, no people, 30 feet. Every blade of grass was visible now. A discarded tire, a rusted oil drum, the field rushing up to meet him. 20 feet. His hand closed around the ejection handle. One last try. He pulled. The canopy, explosive bolts fired, the plexiglass dome blew away. The rocket motor in the seat ignited. Marcus felt himself lifted, thrown, the G-forces enormous. The parachute pack on his back deployed, the drogue chute pulling out the main canopy. But there was no time, no altitude. The parachute was still unfurling when the P-80 hit the ground. The explosion was massive, a fireball that rose 200 feet into the air. The shockwave caught Marcus in mid-air, still strapped to the rocket seat, the parachute only half deployed. Shrapnel ripped through the silk, through his flight suit, through him. He hit the ground hard, tumbled, came to rest 30 feet from the burning wreckage. For a moment, he was still conscious, still aware. He could smell the burning aviation fuel, feel the heat on his face, hear sirens in the distance. He turned his head. Through the pain, through the gathering darkness, he could see the houses he had cleared, the children still playing in the sprinkler, unharmed, safe. Marcus Webb closed his eyes. 24 years old, he had survived 40 combat missions, destroyed 40 enemy aircraft, and in the end, his final victory was against a fuel pump and gravity. The irony would have made him smile if he still had the strength. 5,000 miles away, at almost the exact same moment, Marcus Webb died on a California airfield. A B-29 superfortress called the Enola Gay was approaching the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The bombardier lined up his target. The bay doors opened. A single bomb fell. At 8:15 a.m. Japanese time, the same minute Marcus's P-80 exploded, the atomic age began with a flash of light, brighter than 1,000 suns. When the newspapers hit the streets that evening, the headlines were uniform, block letters, full front page. Atomic bomb destroys Japanese city. New weapon may end war. The story of Lieutenant Marcus Webb's death appeared on page 9. A small notice: war hero dies in test flight crash. 3 paragraphs. No photograph. The ace of aces, the man who had destroyed 40 Japanese aircraft and revolutionized fighter tactics, was buried by history in less than 24 hours. The atomic bomb took all the oxygen from every other story. Marcus's sacrifice, clearing those houses, saving those children, went largely unnoticed. Evelyn Frost received the telegram that afternoon. She read it once, set it down on the kitchen table, and sat in silence for 3 hours. Then she called Marcus's parents in Wisconsin and told them their son was gone. The funeral was small. Family, a few Air Force officers. Jake Morrison flew in from the Pacific, his uniform still showing the stains of jungle combat. General Hayes attended in dress blues, his face carved from stone. They buried Marcus in a cemetery in Glendale. The ceremony was brief. A chaplain said words about sacrifice and service. A bugler played taps. The flag from Marcus's coffin was folded and presented to Evelyn. She stood at the graveside long after everyone else had left. The summer sun beat down. In the distance, she could hear aircraft taking off from Burbank. Jets, probably. The future that Marcus had helped build. "You promised," she whispered to the grave. You promised you'd come home. But he had come home. Just not the way either of them had planned. 1 year later, in the summer of 1946, Evelyn Frost stood before Lucky 13 in the Air Force Museum. The P-38 gleamed under the lights, looking exactly as it had in New Guinea. 40 rising sun flags painted below the cockpit. Her own portrait on the nose, forever young, forever smiling. A museum guide was leading school children past. Lieutenant Marcus Webb flew this aircraft. 40 victories, America's ace of aces. He revolutionized fighter tactics. A small boy raised his hand. "Is he still alive?" The guide shook his head. He died testing jet aircraft, helping build the future. The children moved on. Evelyn remained. She reached out and touched the painted portrait of herself. The young woman she had been when Marcus flew into battle, carrying her face with him. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "You came home. Just not the way we planned." She left the museum. She didn't come back. 3 months later, she married a schoolteacher from Sacramento, a quiet man who had never flown and never wanted to. They had 2 daughters. She taught music, lived to 83. And every August 6th, she left flowers at a grave in Glendale, but she never told her family why. 40 years after Marcus's death, in 1985, an elderly woman arrived at the Air Force Museum in a wheelchair. The docent didn't recognize her at first. Then he saw where she was going. Lucky 13 sat in the same spot. Smaller exhibit now, fewer visitors, but still there. Evelyn Frost, now Evelyn Harrison, 84 years old, asked to be wheeled close to the aircraft. She gazed at the portrait on the nose, the young woman she had been. The face Marcus had carried into 40 battles. "I kept living," she said quietly to the painting, "like you wanted. I had a good life, but I never forgot." She died 6 months later. Her daughters, cleaning out her house, found a box in the attic. Inside, Marcus's letters from New Guinea. His notebook with the firing solution diagrams, and a faded photograph of a young pilot standing beside a P-38, grinning like he owned the sky. They donated it all to the museum. In 2025, 80 years after Marcus Webb's death, Lucky 13 still occupies a corner of the Air Force Museum. The exhibit is smaller now. Most visitors walk past without stopping, on their phones, busy. The past is distant, irrelevant. But on a Tuesday morning in July, an old man stops, 93 years old, bent with age, wearing a veteran's cap with Pacific Theatre pins. He stands before the P-38 and slowly raises his hand in salute. His granddaughter stops beside him. "Grandpa, did you know him?" "Briefly. I was a rookie in New Guinea. Lieutenant Webb taught me the head-on tactic. Saved my life more than once." He's quiet for a long moment. He's saved a lot of lives. "What was he like?" The old man considers. "Everyone thought he was reckless, but he wasn't. He was precise. He looked at an impossible problem and found the mathematical solution. He gestures at the aircraft, changed the whole war, then died testing the future he'd helped create. That's sad?" "No," the old man shakes his head. "That's what heroes do. They don't quit when the job is done. They keep pushing, keep building, even when it costs them everything." They stand in silence. Then the old man salutes one final time and they leave. The museum closes at 6. The lights dim. Lucky 13 sits alone in the darkness with its 40 kill marks and its fading portrait. Outside, jets leave contrails across the California sky. Silver lines in the blue, fast, deadly, efficient. Marcus Webb helped build that future. He proved jets could work, that pilots could master them. He paid for that knowledge with his life, but the work remains, the tactics remain. The lives saved remain. In Glendale, a simple headstone marks his grave. Marcus Webb, 1921 to 1945. Ace of Aces. Every August 6th, someone leaves flowers, sometimes a veteran, sometimes a pilot, sometimes someone who simply believes heroes shouldn't be forgotten. The manual said it couldn't be done. The experts said it was suicide. The enemy thought they were invincible. Marcus Webb proved them all wrong. Not with recklessness, not with luck, with mathematics, with courage, with a wall of lead that flew straight and true. He was 21 years old when he washed laundry in Oakland, humiliated and mocked. He was 24 when he died, saving children he would never know. In between, he changed the world. That's not a tragedy. That's a legacy.